The Hawk, the Hound, and the Butterfly. Chapter 5. Artemis. Artemis lay on the bed in her cell. Her eyes were closed, but more awake than ever. Her heart pumped so fast she thought it might spring out of her chest. She dug her fingers into the thin sheets on the bed. Her body shivered, but it wasn't from the cold, and she wasn't as scared as she had been earlier. Madge and Jicklick were at the far end of their cell, heads squished against the wall. They craned their necks to see as far down the hallway as they could. Artemis could only hear footsteps and the clanking of chainmail slowly fading. "Now," Madge whispered. Artemis flew up off the bed, whipping the sheets off with her. They were already tied together, her own and the sheet from Madge and Jicklick's bed. Artemis began to spin them tight, creating a makeshift rope. At one end of the makeshift rope, Artemis tied a loop. A bull had gotten loose when she was down at the markets one day, and she'd seen one of the farmers quickly tie the knot, then rope the bull by its horns. She'd asked him to teach it to her, and had spent that whole afternoon trying to perfect it. It would be the perfect knot for what she needed to rope in. Jicklick scampered over to the barred wall that was shared between the cells, dragging Madge alongside him. He clung to the bars and they both peered at Artemis. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on ends. Artemis fixed her eyes on the poker leaning up against the fireplace. It seemed further away than she had first thought. Would the bedsheets in her hands be able to reach it? Even if they did, were they going to be strong enough to hold on to it? They were so threadbare that you could see through them when you held them up. "It's okay, dear," Madge whispered. Artemis looked over at her. "You can do it," whispered Jicklick. They both smiled at her. Artemis's heart felt warmer than it had since being in that dark, dank old dungeon. She took a deep breath. This was going to work, she told herself. She could do this. She once saw a stable groom rope the Lady Miranda's champagne mare that had been frightened by a cannon going off. It hadn't looked that hard, although Artemis felt more like the horse than the stable groom at that moment. Artemis started swinging the looped end of the rope in her right hand. She kept the other end anchored under her foot, just in case it got away from her. She released it and held her breath as it glided across the room. The rope collapsed into a pile on the floor, an arm's length to the right of its target. Artemis huffed. "Quickly, dear, try again," Madge said, but Artemis was already pulling the rope back in. Artemis angled her body so she had more room to move. It also allowed her to swing the rope faster. She let go of the looped end and watched it fly across the room again. It just gripped around the top of the poker. Jicklick clapped. Madge shook her head at him. He shrunk down, but still clapped his hands. Only a little softer now. A sense of pride grew within Artemis. Her plan was working. She would get the poker and break them all out within no time. Artemis yanked on the rope. The knot tightened and slipped off the top of the poker, falling to the ground. Artemis threw her head back and let out an exasperated sigh. "I thought I had it." "It's okay, stay calm," Madge said. "Just have another go." Artemis took a deep breath as she pulled the rope back in and loosened the knot. "Hurry, must hurry," Jicklick said, shaking the bars. "Stop that, you'll make her nervous," Madge said. Jicklick clasped his hands over his mouth. His eyes bulged above them. Artemis gripped the rope in her hands. She closed her eyes and was back home with Apollo. He was teaching her how to play his lyre, the one that had been their mother's. "Remember the first thing we do before playing?" His voice was in her head. Artemis began to stretch her fingers around the rope. She saw Apollo's smile. "You remember well," he said. She always did. Artemis opened her eyes. There was her target, the poker leaning against the fireplace. Her eyes focused on it as she started swinging, a fast but steady pace. She waited for the exact moment and then released. The rope soared across the room. It fell and hooked itself around the handle of the poker, a perfect landing. Artemis cautiously pulled on the rope. It tightened securely around the handle. "Got it," she said under her breath. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw big grins on both Madge and Jicklick's faces. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Artemis turned to Madge and Jiklik, her eyes wide. "They're coming," Jiklik said. He whipped his head back and forth between the direction of the hallway and Artemis. "Pull it in, quickly now," Madge said. Artemis tugged on the rope. The poker refused to budge. What Artemis hadn't noticed was the small metal hook that kept the poker secured to the wall. She cursed herself under her breath. Artemis tugged again, being careful not to dislodge the knot in the process. The poker twisted but didn't come free. Artemis's heart was pumping fast. If they caught her, she'd never have a chance of seeing any of her friends or family ever again. "It's not coming loose," Artemis said, her voice shaking. Madge and Jiklik were at the edge of their cell, peering down the hallway. The footsteps grew louder. Whoever they belonged to would be there soon. "Bring it over here," Madge said, as she and Jiklik waddled over to the barred wall the cells shared. "We'll all try together." Artemis ran over to them and crouched down with the rope. Madge and Jiklik grabbed on. "Ready?" Jiklik and Madge both nodded. "Pull!" All three heaved on the rope. The footsteps were not far off. Again! They heaved on the rope. This time the poker broke free. Artemis fell backwards, smacking her back against the cold, hard floor. The poker hit the bedsheet rope as it fell on the ground, muffling the sound of metal on stone. Artemis ignored the pain spiking through her spine and pulled the sheet in, dragging the poker closer. It was so close. She went to the bars and reached her hand out through them. The footsteps stopped. Artemis brushed the poker with the tips of her fingers. Then another reached out too. It was pale and thin, like a skeleton with skin draped over it. Her eyes followed the hand up the arm and met the face of a man. Artemis's body froze. His grey hair was wild, sticking out on ends. The corner of his lips curled into a smirk. Purple and blue veins glowed through his pale skin. He wore a short grey tunic, belted at the waist over long trousers, and over it was a stained leather apron. Artemis couldn't be sure what the stains were, but they were dark and flaky, like dried blood. But none of that was what made Artemis tremble. He had dark, hooded eyes that reminded Artemis of a man she had met at the market when she was a child. The cart he pulled was full of bright, fresh red apples. He offered her one and said she could have another if she helped him push the cart back to his home. He'd looked so old and frail that Artemis would have helped him if her uncle hadn't stepped in. He'd told her the man was lying, and he tricked children into taking them away. She never strayed when at the markets again after that. 2 Tekken guards stood behind the man, clad in dark blue chainmail. One was a young man with fiery red hair who didn't look much older than Artemis. The other guard had black hair, speckled with greys, and wrinkled leathery skin, like he'd spent his entire life outside in the sun. A deep scar ran from his chin down his neck and into his chainmail. The man with the hooded eyes yanked the poker away from Artemis. His eyes examined the bedsheet around it. He flicked the poker and the bedsheets fluttered to the ground, just in front of Artemis. "Causing trouble, are we?" His voice was deep and he spoke slowly, enunciating each word carefully. It sent a shiver down Artemis's spine. "No, no, no, no." He shook his head and his voice changed. It was now high-pitched, and he spoke with urgency. His expression morphed as well. His hooded eyes were now wide open, his lips were pursed, and his eyebrows furrowed. He looked over the poker and bedsheet on the ground. "If the subjects hear about this, they'll attempt to escape too. And before we know it, we'll have a riot on our hands, and all my work will be destroyed, and You're right," he interrupted himself. This time he spoke loudly, spitting out his words. His expression changed once more, matching his voice. His nostrils flared and his face started to redden. His fingers balled into a fist around the poker as his eyes honed in on Artemis. "Why were there no guards here?" He brandished the poker like a weapon at the older guard. "Maxentius, explain." The older man didn't flinch, as if this insanity was a common occurrence to him. Artemis pulled her arm back inside the cell and hugged her chest. She'd never seen a man change his personality from one extreme to the other so quickly, like the one in front of her did. It was almost like there were several people inside his body, all vying to be heard. The man's temper subsided. He spoke with the deep, slow voice he'd originally used. It seemed to be his dominant personality, taking control of the situation as he spoke to the scarred guard he called Maxentius. Artemis peeked a look at the younger guard. His body was still, except for his right foot that was slowly tapping. It gave him away. He was disturbed by the man too, but was trying to hide it. His eyes moved all over, every which way but at the man. They landed on Artemis. She quickly averted her gaze. "Curious lot, this bunch," the man with the hooded eyes said. He bent down in front of Artemis's cell, sitting on his heels, using the poker to balance himself. He leaned his head in, tilting it from left to right as he peered at Artemis through the bars. A queasy feeling gurgled inside of Artemis's stomach. He looked at her, as if she were a lamb being seen fit for slaughter. She pulled her arms in tighter, turning her head down and away from his gaze. "Don't be shy, my lovely," he said. Artemis's teeth began to chatter. She took a shaky breath. Tears welled in her eyes. Artemis hated that she felt that way. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am the Creator. And this," he motioned with his free hand around the room, "this is your new home." The words pierced her mind and began to flow all throughout her body. His lips stretched back over his teeth in a smile that made the first tear fall from Artemis's eyes. She wanted him to stop. She wanted him to leave. She wanted to go back home. In what could only be a frightened, thoughtless act of defiance, Artemis looked him dead in the eyes and spat in his gleaming face. She instantly regretted what she'd done. Couldn't believe that she'd actually done it, that she was even capable of such a thing. A wad of spit dripped down across the Creator's eye. The smile had disappeared. As it dribbled down his cheek, he drew out his long grey tongue and licked it up like a frog lapping up an insect. Artemis could feel her stomach bubbling. It almost came up, but she managed to force it back down. The Creator chuckled a deep, guttural laugh. "Feisty little one." He looked over at the other cell at Madge and Jiklik. They stood huddled at the end of their bed, clinging onto each other, shivering with fear. "Perhaps we could use these for Project Nightshade." The Creator stood up, a horrible grin still on his face. He slapped the poker against his hand. Artemis flinched at the sound. "Well, let me see. I shall have to make a few adjustments. Just let me see." His high-pitched voice returned. He waved the poker around in one hand and scratched his chin with the other. "First we'll have to see if there's any—" "Just shut up and do it. They've already heard too much." The hot-headed side of the Creator interrupted again. Artemis peeked over at Madge and Jiklik while the Creator fought with himself. She tried to smile, just to reassure them that everything would be okay, even if she knew it wouldn't. She wanted them to be okay. She wanted them to at least know that she was there for them. In the short time that Artemis had known them, she knew that they were good, and she was certain she could trust them. The Creator's voices stopped arguing. Artemis turned her head back to the front of the cell, and there he was, the Creator, crouching down, staring his dark, unblinking eyes at her. His teeth were sharp and pointed, as if they'd been filed down to look like shark's teeth. His breath was such a vile stench that it could wilt a flower with one breath. Artemis felt the bile in her stomach try once again to claw its way back up her throat. The Creator looked down at the sheets in front of Artemis's cell, then back at her. She wanted to react. She wanted to hurt him, but the small bout of bravery she'd experienced in her defiance had vanished. She did nothing but watch as the Creator stood up and pulled the sheets away from Artemis's cell with the end of the poker. He twirled them around the poker and flung them into the smouldering fire. The fire lit up and turned the sheets to ash within seconds. "Sleep well," he said, still grinning as he turned to the older guard. "Maxentius, keep a close eye on this one." He pointed at Artemis with the poker. "Certainly, sir," Maxentius said. "Whelp, stay here. Keep watch." The young guard nodded. "Yes, sir," he said. He lowered his head and held a clenched fist across his chest. "See you all again very soon," the Creator said as he turned down the hallway and walked away. As he walked, he dragged the poker along the stone walls. The screeching sound could be heard long after he'd left.